Mom, you don't need to come this summer, my son David muttered quickly into the phone. Jessica thinks it's better if we keep the lake house for our immediate family this year. We really need the space to ourselves. I stood in my kitchen wiping flour from my hands with a dish towel. The afternoon sun was warm against the window, but the air in the room suddenly felt incredibly still. I didn't drop the phone. I didn't gasp or start crying. At 65, I had lived through enough genuine heartbreak to know the difference between a tragedy and a profound disappointment. Your immediate family, I repeated, keeping my voice entirely level. Yeah, he answered, sounding relieved that I hadn't started screaming. You know how it is. The kids are getting older, and Jessica's sister is coming down with her husband. We just need the privacy. You understand, right? In the background, I could hear Jessica's voice muffled but directing him. Tell her we'll send pictures. We'll send pictures, David parroted. Love you, Mom. The line clicked. He hung up without waiting for my response. I placed the phone gently on the marbles counter. I didn't call him back to argue. I didn't text Jessica to demand an explanation. I just stood there, letting the reality of their entitlement wash over me. The lake house wasn't a family heirloom. It wasn't a shared investment. I bought the land and built the cabin entirely with my own savings 5 years ago, shortly after my husband passed. It was my sanctuary. Now I was being uninvited from my own property so my daughter-in-law could host her sister. They had completely forgotten whose name was on the deed. I dried my hands, walked into the living room, and opened my laptop. I wasn't going to fight them for a place at my own table. I was just going to remove the table entirely. Building that lake house had been my lifeline. After losing Mark, the silence in our city home felt suffocating. I needed a project, something to anchor me to the future. I drained a significant portion of my personal savings, hired a reliable local builder, and designed every inch of that waterfront property. It was modest, but beautiful cedar siding, large windows facing the water, and a wraparound deck. For the first 2 years, it was exactly what I envisioned, a peaceful retreat. But then David and Jessica started visiting. At first, it was just the occasional weekend. Then they asked to leave a few things in the guest closet to save room in their car. A month later, Jessica completely rearranged the living room furniture while I was out buying groceries. It flows better this way. Karen, she smiled, handing me a glass of iced tea. She didn't ask. She simply informed me. I let it slide. I wanted a good relationship with my son and my grandchildren. I convinced myself that her controlling nature was just a harmless quirk. But boundaries are like sandcastles. If you don't reinforce them, the tide simply washes them away. Soon, my gardening tools were moved to the damp basement so David could store his large kayak in the shed. My favorite reading chair was replaced by a massive, ugly beanbag for the kids. Jessica even changed the curtains in the kitchen because my choice of pale yellow clashed with her aesthetic. I swallowed my irritation, reminding myself that family requires compromise. But looking back, I was the only one compromising. They were just claiming territory. They stopped asking if they could come up and started telling me when they would be arriving. The shift was subtle, almost invisible, until I found out what they did to my private study last Thanksgiving. The final crack in our relationship actually started forming a year before that phone call. I drove up to the lake house early on a Friday morning, hoping to enjoy some quiet reading before David and his family arrived for the long weekend. When I unlocked the front door, something felt wrong. The house smelled faintly of vanilla air freshener, a scent I despised. I walked down the hall and stopped dead in my tracks. My master bedroom, the one I had carefully decorated with Mark's old photographs and my favorite quilts, was completely stripped. My things were boxed up and shoved into the small, cramped guest room near the laundry area. In my place, Jessica had set up a king-sized mattress, her expensive skincare bottles lining my bathroom vanity. When they arrived a few hours later, Jessica didn't even blink. "Oh, good. You found your new room," She beamed, carrying a load of groceries past me. The kids need to be closer to us at night, and the master suite is just more practical for a family of 4. You're just one person, Karen. You don't need all that space. David looked down at his shoes, refusing to meet my eyes. It makes sense, Mom, he mumbled. I spent that entire weekend sleeping on a lumpy mattress in the back room while they treated me like an unpaid chef and babysitter. Since you're up, could you watch the twins while we take the boat out? Jessica would ask, already walking out the door. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a fit. I simply packed my bags on Sunday morning, handed David the spare keys to the boat, and drove back to the city in complete silence. That was the last time I allowed them to dictate my weekend. But their audacity didn't stop there. The real wake-up call arrived in a shared digital family calendar. After David's phone call uninviting me, I opened the shared family calendar app on my tablet. Jessica had color-coded their entire summer. Starting on June 24th, there was a massive block spanning 4 solid weeks labeled Andrew's family summer kickoff and Jessica's family reunion. They had planned a month-long vacation at my house. They were bringing her parents, her sister's husband, and 3 dogs. They hadn't just uninvited me. They had evicted me to run a free private resort for her relatives. I stared at the screen, feeling a cold, calm clarity settle over me. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was profoundly awake. If I confronted them, David would apologize. Weakly, Jessica would twist my words to make me look like a jealous, unreasonable mother-in-law, and the stress would ruin my entire summer. I refused to play the victim in a soap opera of their making. They wanted the house for themselves. They believed it belonged to them. I closed the calendar app and opened a web browser. I searched for the top real estate agent in the Lakes County. I needed someone aggressive, someone who understood the current market, and most importantly, someone who could move quickly. I dialed the number. A woman named Susan answered. Hi, Susan. My name is Karen Andrews. I began, my voice steady. I have a waterfront property on the North Shore. I want to list it immediately. But here is the catch. I need it sold closed and out of my name before the 24th of June. Susan paused for a second. That's an aggressive timeline, Karen. But waterfront properties are incredibly hot right now. If priced right, we can make it disappear. Let's make it disappear, I replied. I had exactly 4 weeks to change my life. Susan didn't waste a single hour. She visited the property the very next morning while David and Jessica were hundreds of miles away in the city, entirely oblivious. The market was wildly in my favor. Susan arranged for a photographer, and by Wednesday evening the listing went live. I gave her one strict instruction: all showings had to happen during the weekdays. I knew David and Jessica worked Monday through Friday, meaning there was zero chance they would randomly show up and interrupt a tour. By Friday afternoon, Susan called me. I was sitting on my back patio, sipping black coffee. Karen, we have 4 offers, she announced, sounding thrilled. 3 of them require financing, which will drag out the closing timeline. But the 4th offer is cash. A retired couple from Chicago. They want to close in 20 days. They'll even take the property fully furnished exactly as it stands. I smiled. A cash offer meant no tedious bank appraisals, no drawn-out inspections, and a lightning-fast transfer of ownership. It also meant I didn't have to spend a week moving heavy furniture. Accept the cash offer, I instructed. Full asking price. Tell them they can keep everything from the couches to the kayaks. I only need 1 afternoon to remove my personal belongings. Done, Susan replied. I hung up the phone and looked out at my small garden. I felt incredibly light. There was no knot of anxiety in my stomach, no lingering guilt about taking away my grandchildren's summer spot. Jessica and David had made their choice. They decided I was an obstacle to their happiness. I was simply removing the obstacle. Now I just needed to clear out my memories. I drove up to the lake house on a quiet Tuesday morning. The air was crisp and the water looked like perfectly smooth glass. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside, taking a deep breath. It still smelled like vanilla. I didn't feel sentimental. I walked straight into the back guest room and began packing the few things that truly mattered to me. Mark's old fishing hat, my favorite hand-painted coffee mugs, a stack of novels I had left on the nightstand, a framed photograph of Mark and me standing on the empty dirt lot before the house was built. Everything fit into two medium-sized cardboard boxes. As I walked through the living room, I noticed three large Amazon boxes sitting on the kitchen island. I walked over and checked the labels. They were addressed to Jessica. She had already started shipping party supplies, sunscreen, and pool floats directly to my house for her massive family reunion. I left the boxes exactly where they were. I didn't touch David's expensive grill on the back deck. I didn't touch Jessica's aesthetic curtains or her premium skincare products in the master bathroom. The new owners were buying the house fully furnished. If they wanted to throw out Jessica's expensive lotions, that was their business now. I loaded my two boxes into the trunk of my car. I locked the front door, slid my physical key off my key ring, and left it hidden under the welcome mat for Susan's assistant to grab later. I didn't look back as I drove down the gravel driveway. They wanted a private family summer. They were about to get a very different kind of surprise. The closing process was remarkably quiet. On the 20th of June, 4 days before David and Jessica's planned takeover, I drove to the real estate office downtown. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no pounding of gavels. Just a quiet room, a stack of paperwork, and a notary stamping pages. I signed my name exactly 14 times. When the final document was pushed across the table, the agent smiled. "Congratulations, Karen. The funds have already been wired to your account. The buyers are incredibly excited to move in this weekend. I hope they love it as much as I did," I answered honestly. I walked out of the office and checked my banking app. The balance had jumped by a life-changing amount. It wasn't just the money. It was the absolute freedom it represented. I drove straight to my local bank branch and did two things. First, I moved the new funds into a secure private trust account that no one else could access. Second, I canceled the joint credit card I had allowed David to keep for emergencies since college. He made over $100,000 a year. He didn't need his mother's safety net anymore. For good measure, I logged into my cellular provider and removed David and Jessica from my family phone plan. If they were independent adults who didn't need me at the lake house, they certainly didn't need me paying their phone bills. I spent the rest of the week tending to my roses, reading on my porch, and enjoying the absolute silence of my own home. The 24th of June finally arrived. At exactly 2:15 p.m., my phone began to buzz. I let the phone ring 3 times before I picked it up. Mom David's voice was completely frantic, entirely different from the smug tone he had used weeks ago. "Mom, what's wrong with the smart lock? The code isn't working. Jessica's parents are in the car and the kids are hot. Can you reset it from your app?" I took a slow sip of my iced tea. "I can't do that, David." "Why not?" "Did the Wi-Fi go down? Just give me the physical lockbox code," he pleaded. "I don't have the code," I answered calmly. The new owners must have changed the locks yesterday after they moved in. Dead silence on the other end of the line. The quiet stretched for so long I could hear a distant bird chirping through his speaker. The new owners." David finally stammered, his voice cracking. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "I sold the house, David. The transaction closed 4 days ago. The property belongs to a lovely retired couple from Chicago now. I suggest you don't try forcing the door. They might call the authorities." I heard a sharp gasp in this background. Jessica had obviously been listening on speakerphone. Suddenly, the phone fumbled and her shrill voice pierced through the receiver. "You sold it!" Jessica practically screamed. "Without telling us, my entire family is sitting in the driveway. We have a 4-week vacation planned. How could you do this to us? You told me I wasn't needed this summer." I reminded her, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "You said it was better to keep the house for your immediate family. Since I am no longer considered your immediate family, I disposed of my property. Have a safe drive back to the city." "Wait! Do not hang up on me!" Jessica shrieked. "Where is our stuff? David's kayak? My clothes? The boxes I shipped? I sold the house fully furnished," I replied casually. The buyers were very accommodating. If you politely knock on their door, they might be kind enough to hand over your personal items. Or they might have thrown them in the dumpster. I really couldn't say. "You are out of your mind," she yelled. "David, do something. Tell her to fix this." "Mom?" David sounded like a deflated balloon. "Why would you do this? We just wanted a few weeks to ourselves. You didn't have to go nuclear." "I didn't go nuclear. David, I simply stopped paying for a stage I wasn't allowed to stand on," I answered. "Oh, and since you are fully independent now, you'll find your backup credit card has been deactivated and you have until the end of the month to find a new cellular provider. I'm canceling the family plan." "What, Mom? You can't just cut us off." "I am not cutting you off. I am respecting your boundaries," I countered. "You wanted your space. Now you have it. Completely." I didn't wait for Jessica to start screaming again. I ended the call and blocked both of their numbers on my phone. I didn't block them permanently just for the weekend. I knew they needed a few days to sit in the uncomfortable reality they had created. Actions have consequences. They had spent 2 years treating me like a disposable wallet and a free maid. I expected anger, and I expected blame. What I didn't expect was for David to show up at my front porch 3 days later. When I opened my front door on Tuesday morning, David stood there alone. He looked exhausted. There was no sign of Jessica or the kids. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I didn't open the screen door. "We can talk right here." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Jessica is furious. Her parents had to book a cramped motel and the whole weekend was a disaster. She blames you for ruining her summer. "I'm sure she does," I nodded. "It's much easier to blame me than to admit she overstepped." "Mom, I'm sorry." He offered, though. He couldn't look me in the eye. I should have stood up to her. "I knew it was your house. I hate arguing with her. It's easier to just go along with what she wants." "It might be easier for you, David, but it cost you my trust," I stated firmly. "You allowed your wife to push me out of my own home. You let her treat me like a nuisance. I sold that house because I refused to be a guest in a life I built." He nodded slowly. Are we done? Are you cutting me out forever?" "You are my son, and I will always love you," I answered. "But things are going to be very different now. No more shared accounts, no more free vacations. When you want to see me, you will ask respectfully, and you will leave Jessica's entitlement at the door." He swallowed hard, nodded, and walked back to his car. A month later, I used a fraction of the lake house money to buy a beautiful small RV. I didn't want to be tied down to one property anymore. I started driving across the country, visiting national parks and staying wherever the weather felt nice. I occasionally received text messages from David, mostly pictures of the grandchildren. He is trying. Jessica hasn't spoken to me since that day on the driveway, which suits me perfectly. Some people think setting boundaries is cruel. I learned that it's the exact opposite. Letting people walk all over you breeds resentment, but standing your ground brings absolute peace. My money, my time, and my respect belong to me. And for the first time in a very long time, I am holding all the keys. Looking back on everything, the biggest lesson I learned wasn't about money or real estate. It was about self-worth. For a long time, I thought that being a good mother and mother-in-law meant endless compromise. I thought keeping the peace meant quietly accepting whatever was handed to me. But I realized that true love, whether it's for your family or for yourself, doesn't require you to shrink your own life just to make someone else comfortable. Setting boundaries isn't a punishment, and it certainly isn't selfish. Sometimes refusing to let people take advantage of you is the only way to save your own peace of mind. We can't control how other people treat our generosity, but we absolutely hold the power to stop giving it to those who don't respect it. Have you ever had to draw a hard line or set a difficult boundary with your own family? I'd really love to hear your experiences and how you handled it. So please share your thoughts in the comments below. If my story resonated with you today, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself. Thank you so much for being here and listening, and I'll see you in the next video.